In 2019, President Donald Trump made waves when he suggested purchasing Greenland. What seemed like a bizarre statement at the time now feels like a geopolitical powder keg. Europeans are just beginning to grasp how serious the president is about his plans that could alter the very foundations of NATO. At the heart of this issue is not just the economic gain or strategic advantage of controlling the island, but a challenge to the sovereignty of Denmark and the self-determination of Greenland. The idea of annexation raises a fundamental question: what happens when a NATO ally's territory is no longer inviolable? Trump's actions could set off a chain of events that threaten the very security framework that has kept Europe stable for decades. Europe now faces an existential crisis, and the path forward is fraught with tension, choice, and uncertainty. Stay with me as we delve into the heart of this crisis and explore what's at stake for Europe and the world. Let's first understand how we got here and what's really behind Trump's Greenland obsession. To truly understand the gravity of the situation, we must first explore the context. In 2025, at the NATO summit in The Hague, European leaders were forced to navigate a turbulent political climate. They used diplomacy, offering trade deals and defense spending successes to maintain U.S. support. But this wasn't just a matter of economic or military concern. It was about keeping the fragile transatlantic alliance intact. Now, facing Trump's Greenland threat, Europe is playing from the same playbook. Denmark, Greenland, and the European Union have offered more NATO presence, more troops and resources, hoping to placate the U.S., but there's a catch. This isn't just about economic influence or security anymore. This is a direct challenge to European sovereignty and international law. For the first time, the U.S. isn't just asking for military presence, it's eyeing the very land itself, putting Europe in a position that could break the alliance apart. So how did we go from strategic negotiations to the brink of a territorial dispute? To understand that, let's take a step back into history. The roots of this tension lie in a complex history. Greenland, while geographically part of the Kingdom of Denmark, has long been at the heart of strategic interest for global powers, particularly the United States. During the Cold War, Thule Air Base in Greenland became a key outpost for U.S. military operations, serving as an early warning system during the height of nuclear threats. Fast forward to 2025, and Greenland still holds significant military value. The U.S. has agreements in place with Denmark and Greenland that allow for an expanded U.S. military presence, ensuring that American interests remain in the Arctic. Yet Trump's fixation on the island goes beyond military strategy. His push for annexation reveals a broader geopolitical ambition, one that challenges not just Denmark's sovereignty, but the entire framework of international agreements. The crux of the matter isn't just military power, it's the shifting dynamics of power on the global stage and the potential unraveling of long-standing alliances. But the stakes aren't just about history or treaties, they're about the present. Let's examine how this issue exploded in the public eye. The tipping point came when President Trump's words, once dismissed as idle talk, started to gain traction. The American public and the world were stunned when he reaffirmed his desire to purchase Greenland. For Europe, this wasn't just a diplomatic faux pas, it was a direct attack on Denmark's sovereignty and Greenland's right to self-determination. The European response was swift but measured. Leaders went into damage control mode, offering trade concessions and military support, hoping to pacify the U.S. without triggering an international crisis. But this time, the old playbook wasn't working. European leaders quickly realized that Trump wasn't interested in deals or compromises. His desire for Greenland wasn't just about military positioning, it was about asserting U.S. control over the island, a move that would shatter the very fabric of NATO. It became clear this wasn't a simple economic issue, it was a full-blown crisis with far-reaching implications. As the pressure mounts, Europe must decide, engage or deter. The stakes have never been higher. Let's now look at the mechanisms at play behind the scenes, the forces shaping this conflict, and how Europe is responding. At the heart of this crisis lies a complex web of political and economic mechanisms that European leaders are struggling to navigate. The first is the military dynamic. Greenland's strategic importance cannot be overstated. For the US, its position in the Arctic is vital for surveillance, missile defense, and positioning in the ever-evolving geopolitical race. But Europe has more than just military concerns to manage. The economic implications are immense. European leaders have been offering the US more access to resources, investment deals, and NATO expansion in a bid to avoid direct confrontation. This strategy, though, only goes so far. For Europe, the risk of an outright annexation of Greenland isn't just about losing a piece of land, it's about losing the credibility of NATO itself. If the United States annexes territory from another NATO member, how can the alliance claim to defend its members' sovereignty? The Europeans' dilemma is further complicated by the delicate balance of power in Washington. While Trump's administration is focused on Greenland, Congress remains a potential check on his ambitions, signaling that the US cannot act unilaterally without facing internal opposition. But just as things seemed to be escalating, Europe faced another test, a second mini-crisis that would add fuel to the fire. The situation escalated once again when tensions over Greenland reached a boiling point. This time, the crisis was marked by Trump's renewed rhetoric, paired with tangible moves to assert US influence over the island. The European response was no longer just diplomatic, it was urgent. France, Germany, and Norway all deployed military units to Greenland, small but symbolic actions aimed at signaling Europe's willingness to defend the island. France even proposed sending additional troops, further emphasizing the gravity of the situation. Europe was prepared for a long diplomatic battle, but what could have been a minor skirmish was quickly turning into an international flashpoint. Yet the reality on the ground was far more dire. Any military conflict between the US and Europe over Greenland would result in catastrophic consequences, both militarily and politically. Europe knew that a direct confrontation with the United States was not an option, and yet the European leaders' hand was being forced. The stakes were rising, and Europe was caught between engaging diplomatically and deterring with military readiness, all while seeking a resolution without breaking the transatlantic bond. The people of Europe, though, were beginning to feel the effects. Let's now examine the impact this crisis had on the citizens of Europe. As the Greenland crisis intensified, the effects began to trickle down to the people of Europe. Ordinary citizens who had once been oblivious to the island's geopolitical significance now found themselves caught in a battle for sovereignty, security, and international law. In cities across Europe, people began to question what it meant for their security. If the US, the world's most powerful military force, could annex a NATO member's territory, what would stop them from doing the same to other allies in the future? For the citizens of Denmark and Greenland, this was an existential threat, as their right to self-determination hung in the balance. European leaders knew the stakes were high, and they began to address the public's growing concerns. The call for unity became louder, with leaders urging solidarity not just with Denmark but with all of NATO. The fear wasn't just of losing Greenland, it was of losing the very credibility of NATO's defense pledge. This wasn't just a political dispute, it was a fight for the very values that bind Europe together. It's time for Europe to act. But the crisis didn't just impact Europe, it had reverberations across the globe. Let's take a look at the global consequences of this unfolding drama. While Europe grappled with the immediate political and military fallout, the repercussions of the Greenland crisis were felt worldwide. The United States, by asserting its dominance over Greenland, wasn't just challenging Europe, it was making a bold statement to the entire global order. The geopolitical implications were profound. The US wasn't simply expanding its territory, it was destabilizing a key region at the intersection of Europe, North America, and the Arctic. The strategic importance of Greenland was immense, and its shift in allegiance could alter the balance of power in the region for decades to come. The impact on global trade, military alliances, and international law was undeniable, Countries in the Arctic Circle were watching closely, their own territorial claims now seemingly at risk. Meanwhile, Russia, already seeking to expand its influence in the Arctic, might seize upon this instability to further challenge NATO. Europe found itself in a delicate balancing act, not only protecting its interests but also trying to prevent a global domino effect that could lead to a reordering of power dynamics. Now, with the stakes higher than ever, Europe must prepare for the future. What lies ahead for this global conflict? Let's consider three possible outcomes. As Europe faces this unprecedented challenge, three possible futures emerge, each with its own set of risks and rewards. First, the best-case scenario. The United States backs off, recognizing that the geopolitical cost of annexing Greenland is too high. Diplomatic efforts succeed and Europe remains united in its commitment to NATO and its sovereignty. The US may extract some trade or military concessions, but the alliance holds firm and peace is preserved in the Arctic. Second, middle ground, a tense compromise where Greenland maintains its autonomy, but the US solidifies its military presence and increases economic influence in the region. Europe may find itself dealing with a more powerful US in the Arctic, but NATO stays intact. However, this scenario leaves Europe on edge as future tensions remain likely. Finally, the worst-case scenario, the US moves forward with annexation, shattering NATO's credibility and throwing Europe into a deep crisis. A fractured transatlantic alliance would destabilize the global order, leaving Europe vulnerable to both internal and external threats. This scenario marks a new era of global uncertainty, where traditional alliances no longer hold the same weight. No matter the outcome, one thing is certain: Europe must prepare for a future where the unthinkable has already begun. As the world watches, Europe faces a defining moment. The crisis over Greenland has forced European leaders to confront a harsh reality. The US is no longer simply a partner in defense. It is a force that could undermine the very foundations of NATO itself. Europe's response will shape the future of the transatlantic alliance and the global order. Whether through diplomacy, deterrence, or a delicate balance of both, Europe must act with unity and resolve. The stakes are high, not just for Greenland, but for the future of international law, sovereignty, and the security of every nation in the alliance. The time for hesitation is over. Europe must stand firm in its defense of sovereignty, human rights, and the values that define the NATO alliance. The question is no longer what if, it's how will Europe respond. In our next video, we'll explore how Europe can strengthen its internal unity and prepare for a world where global alliances are more fragile than ever.